process.
Hey, thank you so much for joining the Recovery Guide. This is a special edition. It is part 3 of 3, and I couldn't be more excited to reintroduce this cat to you. His name is Slow Will, and Slow Will and I go back. I don't know if you've listened to episodes 1 and 2 with Slow Will from the archives, and if you have, then this is repetitive. If not, this is brand new to you. Slow Will is an amazing person. Slow will have 40 years of personal recovery on January 1st of 2020. And he was my mentor, my confidant. He was there from day one for me. And now in the passing of my sponsor, Jack, who did pass away in January with 44 years sobriety, Will is now my sponsor as well. And so I love this man. His wisdom is monumental. This episode is advice to newcomers. We were in Quapaw, Oklahoma, in 2016, seeing Sammy Hagar in the Circle, and we had spent some of that time putting these talks, these episodes together. So relax, enjoy. Make sure you comment and you subscribe, whether you're on Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, iTunes Podcast, or Stitcher. Please subscribe. Leave me a comment. Let me know how I can best serve you as we are in this recovery community together. And without further ado, here is Slow Will, the happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic. We'll see you either on The Fix or Thursday's broadcast of The Checkup. Have a great day. Hello again. This is Robert, and I am the Recovery Guy. And I am back in studio with another podcast with my friend Slow Will. Say hello, Will.
Slow Will, a happy, grateful, recovered alcoholic.
For those of you who have heard my podcasts or video segments before, you know that is often how I introduce myself, and now you know why. I not only met Will early in recovery, but after I relapsed and came back to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous on April 25th of 1986, if it wasn't for his couch, I would not have had a place to live. I would have been on the street. So after all these years, Will, I'm still grateful for everything you did for me in my recovery when we hardly knew each other.
Didn't have to know each other.
Yeah.
You were, reaching out for help in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. On the back page of every piece of literature that they ever printed, it said, when anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there for that. I am responsible. And I just took it to heart. And it was like, I was supposed to help the alcoholic.
Yeah.
I was supposed to, carry the message.
Yeah.
And if it took putting you in my living room on the couch, you weren't the first one and you weren't the last one.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that, and you already know this, but I'm going to say this on a podcast for those of you who don't know. Almost everything I have in my recovery, Will, I patterned after you and the example that you had for me, and it's exciting because what you have in recovery is what you pattern after others. And so there's almost a lineage going all the way back to Bill and Bob and the first 100 as we almost interconnect generationally in recovery, don't you think?
Absolutely. Because, I get a lot of the stuff. I get damn near everything in my sobriety from the people before me in Alcoholics Anonymous. There was John Kay at the Triangle Club in Pomona, rest his soul. He was fantastic about carrying the message, and it was just small things that he would say that would keep me coming back. And I had to have the small things. And I found out that most of the small things that he had said, were from the big book.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of carrying the message to the newcomer and sometimes spoon feeding them, and sometimes putting a boot in their ass.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to know when each one is appropriate, because they both are.
Yeah.
But I guess when we're led, in step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And even the step before that, step 11, where we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out. Those two steps right there, I think, give someone like you or me the wisdom to know when is a boot necessary, or when is a hug more appropriate.
Absolutely, because, I was talking to a new guy a couple nights ago at the meeting, and it was, he'd just come back in for the second or third or fourth time, and he picked up another 24-hour chip. And, instead of coddling him and being real sweet to him, just give him another spoonful of honey, I finally pointed him to another guy with relatively new sobriety that was working the program. And I told him, I said, you need to go over, talk to him. He lives close to you. Get his phone number. Ask him to be your sponsor.
Yeah.
And keep him as a sponsor until you worked enough at a program to where you have enough common sense to pick somebody you can relate to.
Yeah.
And I had somebody appointed themselves as my sponsor when I was about 9 months sober, because I was white-knuckling it. And, I had to get the boot to the ass every once in a while.
Yeah.
Because I was hardcore white-knuckling. I wasn't working the program my first 5 years. And by, just coming to meetings and showing up at the functions, and, eventually when I got out of jail, somebody said, you need to work the program. And, basically just put a strong boot to the butt and said, and we did. And we worked the program the way it's laid out in the big book. And,
Yeah, you were telling me today over dinner that you, and I remembered this, but you had reminded me you took your 5-year chip while you were in jail.
Yeah. San Bernardino County Jail. It was like my 10th time in sobriety of going to jail, because people said you can do anything you want to as long as you were willing to pay the price. Well, I was still going to jail at 5 years of sobriety because that price didn't instill fear into me.
Yeah.
I wasn't worried about going to jail. That was a vacation to me, to get away from the wife, the mom, the dad, the kids, whatever. I could get away and I could go to jail and relax.
Right.
And I could even read the big book in jail.
Yeah.
I celebrated 5 years in jail, but it wasn't good sobriety. It wasn't strong sobriety. It was a dryness. In California, people like me, they said that we were so dry we were fire hazards. And that was me.
Yeah, I can see that. So, between Will and me, we have over 68 years of recovery by the grace of God in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We haven't found it combined necessary to take a drink in over 68 years, and that says a little bit of something. It says more about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous than it says about us. It says about the program that if you're willing to work it, it will certainly work. So with that, Will, getting as a senior member of sobriety here, let me get your view on what you think, and not just one key, but the overall key to long-term sobriety, because that's all we want. I mean, we do it one day at a time based on the maintenance of our spiritual conditioning, but we all hope to be long-term. I remember when I would sit up in a meeting and I would hear someone with, whether it was 6 months or 9 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years, or in my case with you had 6 years at the time. And I thought, that's what I want. Because it says if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you are willing to take certain steps. So part of what you had was time So if you could give advice to a person who is working the program, a relative newcomer, but working the program today for long-term sobriety, what would you tell him or her?
Well, I'd like for it to be as easy as when I got into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to a speakers meeting, and there was an old timer at the meeting, and somebody asked him one time. They says, "How did you get 26 years of sobriety?" And he said, "It's real simple. I didn't drink and I didn't die." And if it was just that simple, I mean, I didn't drink and I didn't die, so I've got 37 years. But there was a lot of stuff that I had to do in between there.
Okay.
I had to go through pain and suffering, a lot of pain and suffering, because, some people say you grow through pain. Mm-hmm. I found out early in sobriety that I don't grow through pain. Pain gets my attention. I grow through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the love, the patience, and the tolerance of the people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where I grow at. The pain just gets my attention.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I like that. So I know you were always big with me. Just, Robert, if it's not in the first 164 pages, I'm not saying it's not important, but don't make it a part of your recovery.
Right. Because the first 164 pages, when early in sobriety, I got what was called the original manuscript of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was the first 164 pages, and the preamble to the first edition of the Big Book. It didn't have any of the stories with it at that point.
Okay.
When the first Big Book was printed, there was no stories. It stopped at page 164. So when I tell people, you get into the Big Book, if you want something, I use the stories in the back of the Big Book as sleep aid.
Okay.
I can lay in bed and pick a Big Book up, and I can open up to the very back of the Big Book, find a story, start reading it, 15 minutes later I'm asleep. Because I get tired.
Yeah.
But that first 164 pages of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's where the program of Alcoholics Anonymous with Bill and Bob and the other 100 people laid it out. And it wasn't just Bill and Bob and Abby T and whoever else the other people were. It was the first 100 people of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it tells you in the preface of the Big Book or wherever it is, the preamble, that, this is how hundreds of men and women have stayed sober.
Yeah.
Not millions like it is now, not thousands like it was back in the 60s, but that was how hundreds of men and women stayed sober. And they didn't have all the stories. You wanted a story from Alcoholics Anonymous back in the day, you had to go to a meeting and talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And you talked after the meeting because they didn't want to talk about their stories during the meeting. From what I understood, they talked about Alcoholics Anonymous during the meeting.
Right.
And you wanted to talk to somebody about your sobriety, your drunkalogs or whatever, you talk to them after the meeting.
Yeah.
But that's
interesting.
But that's why I say, get into the Big Book. That's the first 164 pages.
Yeah.
You can take and tear the Big Book in half and get rid of everything past 164 and still obtain and maintain serenity, sanity, and peace of mind, which is what sobriety is.
Yeah, I agree. So, the importance of meetings. This is a two-part question for you here. The importance of meetings and why are meetings conducted the way, because I know, from region to region or state to state or city to city, there will be a little tweak here and there, but every meeting's important. But why do you think they are? And why are meetings structured or conducted the way that they're structured?
Well, meetings to me are important because that's where the fellowship is within the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The meetings are not Alcoholics Anonymous. That is the fellowship the Big Book talks about. In the Big Book, it says there is a fellowship within the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The program is the Big Book. The fellowship within that program is the meetings, the potlucks, the functions, the dances, whatever you want to go to. And, when I was new in the program, I basically lived at the Triangle Club in Pomona, California.
Yeah.
I was there for a morning meeting. I was there for a noon meeting. I was there for a nighttime meeting. I was there for a late night meeting. If there was an alcothon, I was there, 8 meetings a day for however many days there was for the alcothon. Because that was my insurance payments. Mm-hmm. And if I'm out driving around and I buy a new vehicle and I don't make an insurance payment on it, they might pull my license. I might get into a wreck and I might lose everything that I have. I might lose not necessarily my life, but I might lose everything I have in my life.
Right.
Because of not making that insurance payment. Well, by going to meetings, I get phone numbers, I hear people's stories. I could say, oh man, Bobby P., he did that. Let me call him and find out how he got through that. And so I go to the meetings basically as an insurance payment, on life. Mm-hmm. And you can't get too many meetings. Yeah. And I see people coming into meetings and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late." You're not late till the closing prayer.
Yeah.
You're there, you're going to get something out of the meeting.
So why do you think, because you've lived in Las Vegas, you live in Missouri now, you started your sobriety in California, you've traveled around the country, you've been to countless meetings in 37 years. Why is there such a consistency overall in how they're conducted and what's read before them and so on?
Well, there's a lot of consistency is because most people start their meetings and they contact central office or GSO in New York, and GSO will send them a package on how to start their meetings and how to run their meetings. And a lot of the meetings are an hour long because there's not that many people that show up at them. Mm-hmm. And they have an opening prayer, which sometimes it's a serenity prayer, sometimes it's a Lord's Prayer, and then they'll read a portion of the Big Book of Chapter 3, portion of Chapter 5, sometimes the traditions, and then they have a closing prayer. Where I go to meetings now in Branson, they have a portion of Chapter 3, portion of Chapter 5. They only read 3 of the traditions, your choice, whichever 3 you want to read, and then they do the closing prayer.
Okay.
They don't clap in between people because, every time, if you've got 30 people in there and everybody claps for 10 seconds, there's 3 minutes gone.
Yeah.
That could have been shared by 1 or 2 people.
Gotcha.
And so they don't clap, they don't do all the, yay, and all the, no crosstalk, none of that stuff. So it's like, but it was basically set up by central office, mm-hmm. For meeting structure, and then you could redo it however you wanted, whether it was a men's stag, women's stag, open participation, big book study, whatever.
So before we close out this segment, the importance of service. I know Jack, you know Jack, my sponsor, has been clean and sober 43 years, an incredible example of service. One of the things he told me early on was he never knew anyone actively involved in service who went out, who relapsed. And as a person who had relapsed, and someone who really knew how, it took me about a minute to know how fortunate I was to come back, because I realized not everyone did.
Right.
And so when I came back to the program and started living with you, you were a great example to service. And then he told me that, and I've been in service in various levels ever since for the rest of my 31 years of recovery. What would you tell someone, especially someone new, why it's important that they get involved in service.
Well, because service is a big aspect in anybody's sobriety that's got any longevity, like you just said. Because when, I started going to meetings at the Triangle Club, and then I found out that the second Thursday of every month, there's two guys, Ed Pancake and Ron S., and they used to turn around and take a van down to Skid Row in Los Angeles. And they had the Skid Row meeting, and they'd take cigarettes and they'd take cookies and coffee and stuff and go down there, and they had the meeting in Skid Row. And then there was every other Friday, Bad Attitude Benny would take a meeting out to Chino Men's Institute, and this helped get me. It wasn't so much the service at that time, but it helped get me out of self. Okay. And it helped get me into helping other people. And then I started taking newcomers with me when I got to be where I was chairing a meeting, whether it be LA County Jail or whether I was, Clark County Detention Center in Las Vegas, wherever I happened to be taking a meeting to, I would take a newcomer and, let them know. Because for one, if nobody got into service, Alcoholics Anonymous would fall apart. There would be nothing. But the reason there is Alcoholics Anonymous is because there's service from New York all the way down the chain of commands, through your central office, into the individual groups. And whether, when I was new in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, we didn't have this stuff they invented called styrofoam. Right. Everybody you had cups, you washed ashtrays. Yeah. You made coffee, you went down to the store and you bought the donuts, whatever you happened to do, you were assigned certain tasks, and that was your task as a newcomer in the program.
It's interesting as you're sharing that, and I agree with everything you just said. In the big book, it says there will come a time where we have no mental defense against that first drink. That defense must come from a power greater than ourselves. Do you think that me being in service to others increases my chance that power that I would need to keep me from that first drink, do you think that's increased? Does that make sense?
Yeah, because, it absolutely makes sense, because if you're more involved with other people and you're more involved doing stuff, and carrying the message in different directions, then you don't have as much of a chance to turn around and say, okay, I'm thirsty. I think I can go mow my lawn and have an ice cold beer because it's hot out. Mm-hmm. You don't have that chance. You have to, it's like God's putting stuff in your way. When you were drinking, you had something in here, in your stomach. Way down in the pit of your stomach, you had alcohol just eating away. When you took away that alcohol, you had a big hole right there. You had a void that had to be filled with something. And if you take that void and you don't fill it with something, then alcohol is eventually going to fill that void again.
Yeah, I agree.
But you start turning around and you're putting H&I work, hospitals, institutions, jails, 12-step work, central office work, like your sponsor is a major fanatic for central office work. Yeah. And I think he's owned the Las Vegas central office for the last 50 years.
Something like that.
But, you start putting that inside and it fills that void.
That's a great point. God honors that.
And he does.
Yeah.
You got to have, all your voids have to be filled with something.
Yes. They're going to be one way or the
eventually, other. Yeah. And if you don't fill it with God stuff and with program stuff, even if you, and I don't promote your religion, but if it's not AA stuff, get into your church.
Yeah.
Get into your church, or if you're a Buddhist, into your synagogue, or Jewish with synagogues, or whatever it is, get into it. Get into anything that's faith-based.
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous is faith-based.
Yes, it is.
You've got to have faith in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. You've got to have faith in the millions of people before you that have opened the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You've got to eventually have faith in a higher power.
Right.
Whether it be God, Jehovah, Buddha, whoever it is, you've got to have faith in a higher power.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't have that faith base to fill that void, what's going to fill it?
That's true.
Drugs and alcohol. Hate, anger, guilt, remorse. You fill it with all the negativity that you've been getting rid of.
And you will drink.
And you'll drink.
Yeah. So, the key to long-term sobriety, why are meetings so important? Why are meetings conducted the way that they are? And in the importance of service. And folks, I didn't want you to take my word for it, and really neither does Will, because everything that we discuss, we get from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I wanted you to hear it today from a person who is working on 38 years, and that says a lot. So, Will, thank you for spending the time with us today. I appreciate your wisdom, and you know I love you, brother, and I appreciate your friendship.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Been having a blast.
Well, thanks for being a part of Recovery Guy today, and we look forward to seeing you as we trudge this road to happy destiny.